Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another top 5 Total War video. This time I'll be covering possibly the most requested topic for a top 5 video, the top 5 Total War Warhammer 2 Doomstacks. So in case you're unfamiliar with the term, a Doomstack is basically the strongest possible army that you could create with any given faction. Now, not every faction within Total War Warhammer 2 can actually produce a viable Doomstack. Some of them just don't have those kind of units in their roster, and some Doomstacks are a lot stronger than others. And in this video here, we're going to count down the top 5 strongest Doomstacks. Anyway, with that being said, let's jump in now to number 5. Coming in at number 5 as the 5th strongest Doomstack in the game is the Britannian Royal Hippogriff Knight spam. So what you need in order to achieve this Doomstack is a Lord, preferably one that's finished the Grail Veil, a Damsel of Life, preferably with the Discipline trait, and 18 Royal Hippogriff Knights. So let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this particular Doomstack. It's by no means invincible. There are certainly some situations where you should avoid. It's not particularly good at dealing with massive blobs of enemies. The ideal situation for them is to fly around and then get into a blob themselves, hit a flank of the enemy, and before the other side of the enemy starts crowding in around you, you pull back, recover whatever damage you took with the Damsel of Life, and as the enemy forms back up into a line, you simply go back in again. If your army gets completely surrounded and bogged down by high damage dealing or anti-large units, it's very difficult to simply just fly back up, and so these guys can get killed very quickly. So you just need to be very careful when dealing with mass amounts of enemies. You can certainly win against 2 stacks with just 1, but you just have to be careful. This is not the kind of army that you can just YOLO in a control group and have them one-on-one a whole bunch of units. They need to stick together, and they need to be able to pull back if things start to get a bit too dicey. Now, one of the reasons why it works so well this way is because Hippogriff Knights basically cause stun lock. So by charging in 18 loads of Hippogriff Knights, what you end up doing to enemy infantry and even large units is as soon as you land on them, you start causing constant stun lock. So even though their stats might actually be higher than yours, because just a huge number of Hippogriffs are constantly attacking them, it causes them to not be able to make any attacks at all. And this is why, if they get surrounded, they're not really able to utilize their permanent sort of stun locking of enemies. So that's the sort of the primary way at which you deal with it. It's a hit and run tactic. These guys also work especially good in siege battles because enemies will always put units up on the walls, and it's very easy if you're getting a little bit hurt to just fly up and leave. So these are very good, probably one of the best armies for dealing with sieges. You could deal with 4 armies easily, even if it's got anti-large infantry like Phoenix Guard up on the walls. They perform absolutely amazingly going up against units on the walls. Anyway, that's the number 5 pick. Let's move on now to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is the Warriors of Chaos with a Dragon Ogre Shaggoth spam. So what's comprised with it is, preferably with Codex Sign-Eater, but any other Lord will do. It's just that Codex Sign-Eater does provide bonuses to Shaggoths. You want to make sure you've got a Chaos Sorcerer of Fire and 1 Exalted Hero. Now, both of these guys need to have the Infernal Dominance trait for the extra +5 melee attack. So that means that they're providing everyone in the army, including themselves, an additional 10 melee attack. And since that's the primary trait for the army, it's the thing that you want, that's going to get you like the most effect out of it. That extra 10 melee attack will make a big difference towards how much damage these guys can dish out, because you really don't want them bogged down in combat for a long time. Then the other 17 units are Dragon Ogre Shaggoths. If you want, you can put in the Summoners of Rage. They have a habit of being particularly good for getting rid of infantry, but they're also a little bit more squishy than the Dragon Ogre Shaggoths. They'll tend to fight for a lot longer. These guys tend to take casualties, but they're also, when commanded by Kolek, dirt cheap. So money's not really something that you really need to worry about too much once you've got to this point, because you'll pretty much mow down everything. Now, the strengths and weaknesses to this kind of army, Dragon Ogre Shaggoths are anti-large units, but they can certainly take out full stacks of dwarf infantry. If in anything, you can even take out 2 full stacks of dwarfs. But they definitely perform better going up against large units such as cavalry, even anti-large cavalry from Britannia still get wrecked by Dragon Ogre Shaggoths. And you just need to make sure that in all of your engagements, you need to be the one to make the attack. It's very important to have Lightning Strike so that you can basically just keep smashing armies one at a time. But if one of your armies gets swarmed by 4 enemy armies, which on Legendary difficulty could certainly happen, you can certainly just get worn down. So it's not invincible, but it'll pretty much take out most other stacks in the game on a one-on-one basis, no problem. And it's probably strongest used in sieges, because the AI does not put all of their forces to protect their gate. They'll put units up on the walls or whatever, and once you've broken through the gate, which only takes a few seconds, they really start mowing units down very quickly, whilst they'll still leave a lot of troops in reserve at the town square. So it'll allow you to just pick apart the enemy bit at a time, plus the extra fire magic for just getting rid of mass amounts of infantry from the Chaos Sorcerer can make a big difference. Anyway, that's the number 4 pick. Let's move on to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is the Lizardmen Stegodon Spam stack. So, this particular stack is very particular. Now, you can have any lord that you want command it, but you're actually best off having a life slan. It doesn't really matter what generation they are, but any old life slan is the way to go. In fact, it's actually better to have a life slan than it would be to actually be under the command of Krokgar. So this is how it works. You need a life slan, you need a disciplined Skink Priest of Heavens, a disciplined Source Scar veteran, a disciplined Skink Chief, and then the rest be tier 4 Stegodons, not ancient Stegodons. And the way this works is that these guys here have artillery on their back, so they've got 360 range. So you basically use their mass amounts of artillery to whittle the enemy as they're coming towards you. And whilst they've got a decent amount of speed, like you could outrun dwarfs, eventually they probably will catch up to you. Then you go into melee with them, and you should have thinned them out by such a large margin that you're pretty much going to win. But it's not just that. Then you start utilizing the slan to heal whatever damage is done to you, even after the battle is over. So they start running away, and you just keep healing. Even if you get a 4th generation slan, you should end up with so much Winds of Magic that pretty much after every single battle, you will be at completely full strength, as long as you are the one making the attack. It's very important using this particular Doomstack that you do not let yourself get overwhelmed by mass amounts of enemies. It's important to stay in ambush stance and have Lightning Strike on your lords. That way you can take them out one at a time. After every single battle, you should be completely at full strength. The only thing that you really have to worry about, if in that case, is going up against other kinds of Doomstacks. So for example, even though this is ranked higher than the Shaggoth Doomstack, a Shaggoth Doomstack would actually beat this Lizardmen Doomstack. However, on the campaign map, you are so unlikely to ever encounter a Shaggoth Doomstack that preparing for it is pointless. But if you utilize this, there is basically no situation that you can't handle with the Stegodon Spam army, and that's why it's getting the number 3 spot. Now it's time to move on to number 2. Taking the number 2 spot as the second strongest Doomstack in the game goes to the Norscan War Mammoth Doomstack. Now this army is a little bit better when used as the World Walkers than as Wintertooth, because World Walkers do get the plus 15 extra melee attack for all Mammoth units, and then of course Wulfric's got an additional trait that gets plus 15 extra melee attack for all Mammoth units. That's the Juggernauts of the Sarl. Now as Wintertooth, you can of course confederate Wulfric the Wanderer and still get that trait. It's just you won't get the Gift of Tongues as the faction trait. Anyway, so what's this army comprised of? You need your Lord, doesn't really matter which one. You can have it as Throg, a Marauder Chieftain, Wulfric the Wanderer, doesn't really matter. You want to have a Fire Shaman Sorcerer, it doesn't particularly matter about what trait they have. And then the rest of the army is just comprised of War Mammoths. Now, if you're wondering what about War Mammoths with War Shrines, you can have them if you want, but you got to keep in mind that they are slower than regular War Mammoths. And so when you really need to charge in on like a front line full of guns and you need to close the line in really quickly, War Shrines will lag behind. And the only benefit War Shrines have over regular War Mammoths is that they provide a bit of a leadership buff. So it's not super needed. You can get them if you want, but the regular War Mammoth spam is probably a lot easier to manage. Well, just a little bit easier to manage. Anyway, so what are the strengths and weaknesses of the War Mammoth spam? So it essentially has very, very few weaknesses, and the weaknesses that it has, you probably won't even encounter in a single campaign. It's weak against things such as like a full-on Carnosaur spam, a full-on Necrosphinx spam, or a full-on Dragon Ogre Shagger spam. These are things that you're just very unlikely to ever encounter, especially considering your position. Now, whilst you will end up fighting Chaos if you want, you're definitely going to want that though, because you want to get that 75% off all units upkeep reduction. Really, really good, especially on Legendary difficulty. That's why this entire army here is dirt cheap. But they're not going to default having that many Shaggers in any particular army. The other thing that it could be potentially weak against is just being overwhelmed by just too many armies. And, you know, whilst it will pretty much beat any army that you will face 1-on-1 or even 2-on-1, once it gets to 3-on-1, 4-on-1, you might get worn out. So it's very important that you be the one making the attacks, and wherever possible, lightning striking. Now, in terms of its strength, it basically beats any infantry in the game. So even anti-large infantry just can't handle a mammoth. And that's primarily because the mammoth has so much area of effect damage that it can just about wipe out a single unit of melee infantry in a single charge. So whether it be Blackguard of Naggarond, Phoenix Guard, even Slayers, they really can't do enough to the War Mammoths. Because another thing that's with the Mammoth is that they have an absolute ton of hit points. They're one of the highest hit point units in the game, and that's what makes them so damn strong. So this army here, the only thing that's better than it is, of course, the number one. The number one pick, which I'll mention in just a minute, it can beat everything. It can beat this army easily. But the thing is, you will never encounter it as a player in a single player campaign. Anyway, so with that being said, let's now move on to the number one pick, which is the strongest Doomstack that you can field in Total War Warhammer 2. Taking the number one spot as the strongest Doomstack in Total War Warhammer 2, it actually goes to the Beastmen. And you wouldn't be wrong in thinking that, wait, isn't the Beastmen one of the weakest factions in the game? And yes, they are actually one of the weakest factions in the game. But if you find that there is one particular trait that is available exclusively to the Beastmen, and if you maximize its potential, it's possible to get a result that is absolutely hilarious. Now, the army is called the Fear of Nurgle Stink Doomstack, and it will beat anything that came before it on this list with absolute ease. So, this is what it's comprised of. Ideally, you want Malagor the Dark Omen, because Malagor has got a bunch of skills that reduces enemy leadership in a local region. Very important, but not essential. You can still do this with Morgor or with Kazrak, but then you just need more of these heroes. So with each one of these heroes, you get the trait Nurgle's Foul Stink. With each of them that shows up, enemy leadership -5 in the local region. These heroes don't even need to participate in the battle, they just need to be in the region, and what you'll end up with is a situation where the enemy leadership is 0, if you get enough of them. Now, it can't go below 0, so you can't actually have an enemy army with negative leadership. And this is basically what happens. They go into battle and they've essentially got leadership of 0, but they are boosted by things such as difficulty level, whether or not they're defending a fort or like a victory point, the Lord's abilities, having their flanks secures, having the high ground, that kind of stuff. All of those things will boost their leadership. So, you're going to need something to give it a little extra kick. Because here's the thing about this army. It's not necessarily unique to the Beastmen. The Lizardmen, and I believe the Vampire Counts, can also have a trait that reduces the leadership in the local area. Now, what makes the Beastmen the best at doing this is actually their magic. Now, they've got death magic, and while normally I would recommend using magic for damage purposes, but in this particular case you want to be dropping off that extra leadership. This is to drop off the leadership that the Fear of Nurgle Stink can't get rid of. So the -16 leadership there, that'll get rid of the Lord bonus and the difficulty rating bonus if you're playing on very hard. If you're playing on like easy difficulty, you don't even need to worry about this. They'll rout pretty much instantly. But yeah, now the Vampire Counts can do this. But there is something else that the vampires can't do, which is something that's exclusive to the beastmen, which is the law of the wild, which is devolve, which reduces the enemy leadership by -8. So if you cast both of these spells at the same time in the same location, -24 leadership, you don't even need to fight the units. They'll pretty much shatter on the spot. Now, the Cygors are here, really just so that you've got a siege attacker in the army. You don't need 6. They're just placeholders, really. You only really need 1, because you don't really even need to get inside the settlement. All you need to do is cast these spells, and things will just immediately rout. And that's why this army here is the strongest in the game. The only thing that it really can't handle are unbreakable units. So if you go up against an entire army of steam tanks, or an entire army of giant slayers, then your army is really going to have a hard time dealing with it. But everything else, regardless of how strong it is, you go up against a mammoth spam can't do anything about it, because they'll just instantly rout. This is nothing that the enemy can do. And the thing is, the more Brave Shamans you've got in an army, the more magic you're going to have, so you can cast Doom and Darkness more. This army here could go up against 4 full stacks and walk away with essentially no casualties, because you don't end up fighting them. You just go up to them, cast a spell that reduces their leadership, and then they flee, and you don't even have to fight them. So you end up winning battles without inflicting any casualties, or receiving any casualties. But the thing is, if the enemy lose twice, their army gets wiped out. Or if you're attacking a settlement, their army gets wiped out. So it's winning without having to kill any of them, which is not particularly beastman-like, but it's very good for this particular Doomstack here. And again, that's why it's the strongest army in the game. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this particular top 5 video. Let me know what you think, whether you disagree with one of the items on the list. Let me know if you think that's a different Doomstack should have been on the list. There was a lot of Doomstacks that were taken into consideration, but I do believe that these are the top 5. Anyway, with that being said, I'll see you next time, fuckers.